A third impeachment attempt against Trump. More than 200 lawmakers have now put their names on a formal resolution. And if you're wondering what comes after this, you're asking exactly the right question. Because here's the truth most people miss. What just happened in Washington wasn't actually an explosion of drama or some sudden political earthquake. There was no climactic floor vote, no gavel crashing down to seal anyone's fate, no cameras catching the moment power shifted hands. Instead, what occurred was far quieter and frankly far more calculated. It happened on paper, a document circulated, signatures accumulated, and now 212 elected officials have formally attached their names to a call for impeachment. That specific number isn't just symbolic theater meant to generate headlines. It tells us something concrete about where the machinery of government currently sits and precisely where the momentum is trying to push it next. But let me ask you something nobody else seems to be addressing. Do you actually know what signing this resolution means in practice? Or are we all just assuming we understand because the word impeachment feels so final? Because here's what nobody tells you up front. Impeachment isn't some instantaneous judgment that drops like a courtroom verdict. It doesn't start with chaos, angry mobs, or even a definitive vote that changes everything overnight. It starts with procedure, with paperwork, with the slow turn of constitutional gears that were designed centuries ago to resist exactly the kind of emotional frenzy that moments like this tend to create. When most people hear the term impeachment thrown around in news clips and social media arguments, it lands in their mind as something already completed, as if the mere mention of the word has already determined guilt, assigned consequences, and delivered some form of justice or punishment. But that assumption, however common it might be, fundamentally misunderstands what has actually taken place at this exact stage of the process. The signing of this resolution calling for impeachment is not impeachment in itself, not even close. What it actually represents is the formal opening move in a constitutional sequence that is intentionally much longer, much more complex, and much more deliberate than most people realize. This sequence was designed with great care to separate the act of making an accusation from the act of rendering final judgment. Think of this resolution less like a verdict and more like a referral, a formal recommendation. It's lawmakers collectively stating that the allegations being presented here are serious enough, credible enough, and constitutionally significant enough to warrant a full examination under the specific impeachment framework that the Constitution lays out. And that distinction, that gap between accusation and conclusion, is absolutely essential to understanding what happens next. This resolution does not remove anyone from any office. It does not impose a single penalty, sanction, or legal consequence. It doesn't even confirm that any wrongdoing actually occurred. What it does, and this is critical, is trigger a process, a constitutionally mandated sequence of steps designed to determine whether such conclusions can ever be responsibly reached in the first place. The founders who drafted the Constitution anticipated precisely these kinds of moments, times of intense public anger, political pressure, and emotional reaction. They built the impeachment process specifically to resist immediacy, to slow things down, to force deliberation instead of impulse. That's exactly why impeachment does not begin on the House floor with a dramatic vote to punish or remove. It begins instead in committee, in closed rooms where evidence gets gathered rather than assumed, where documents get requested and analyzed, where witnesses get questioned under oath, where claims get tested rigorously against actual facts. The resolution is simply the legal mechanism that authorizes that investigative work to begin. And this matters more than it might seem at first glance, because without that separation, without that procedural firewall between accusation and judgment, impeachment would become completely indistinguishable from political retaliation. If a resolution itself were treated as impeachment, if signing a document was the same as delivering a guilty verdict, then any majority party could simply label an opponent guilty without ever conducting an investigation, without ever examining evidence, without ever allowing a defense. The system instead insists on steps, on gates, on thresholds that must be crossed one at a time. Each stage requires justification, requires evidence, requires argument before anyone can proceed to the next. The resolution clears the first gate, nothing more, nothing less. Impeachment gets talked about in public discourse as if it were a single event, one dramatic moment where power shifts in an instant and consequences get imposed immediately. In reality, impeachment is a process, and not just any process, but one that is intentionally structured, carefully layered, and deliberately slow. That slowness isn't some bureaucratic flaw or inefficiency that needs fixing. It's the entire design. The constitutional system treats impeachment not as a political weapon to be deployed at will, but as a critical safeguard that must be insulated from haste, from public outrage, and from partisan reflex. At the very heart of this structure lies a fundamental idea. Accusations alone are never sufficient. Serious charges leveled against an elected official demand a method of evaluation that prioritizes hard evidence over raw emotion, that values facts over feelings. Subpoenas get issued to compel testimony and documents from individuals who might otherwise refuse to cooperate. Witnesses may be called to testify under oath, which exposes their statements to serious legal consequences if they turn out to be false. Timelines get constructed, records get compared side by side, and inconsistencies get tested rigorously. None of this happens fast, and none of it is supposed to. Speed favors assumption, favors jumping to conclusions. Structure favors verification, favors getting it right. The process also forces specificity in a way that public debate rarely does. Broad claims or generalized outrage cannot survive committee scrutiny without being translated into precise, detailed allegations. What specific action occurred? When exactly did it occur? Under what authority or circumstances? How does it intersect with constitutional obligations and legal standards? Impeachment demands clear answers to these questions before it can advance to the next stage. One of the most persistently misunderstood aspects of impeachment lies in the division of labor between the two chambers of Congress and the dramatically different standards each chamber must meet. The House and the Senate are not redundant actors simply repeating the same function in this process. They serve distinct constitutional roles, and those roles are governed by entirely different thresholds, different rules, different purposes. The House of Representatives functions as the initiating body in impeachment. Its power is accusatory in nature, not punitive. When the House considers articles of impeachment, it's deciding whether alleged conduct warrants bringing formal charges under the Constitution. This decision requires only a simple majority of members voting yes. That relatively low threshold is completely intentional. It reflects the foundational idea that opening a case, bringing charges forward, should not require overwhelming consensus across the entire chamber, only sufficient concern that the matter deserves formal judgment and trial. The Senate, by contrast, operates as the trial body in this constitutional framework. Once articles of impeachment are formally transmitted from the House, senators take on a role that is deliberately closer to that of jurors than legislators. They hear arguments from both sides, they review evidence presented, and in some cases they question witnesses directly or through submitted questions. When the Senate votes, it is not voting on whether to investigate further or to express disapproval or concern. It is voting on whether to remove a sitting official from office, to end their term immediately. That decision carries an entirely different weight, a vastly more serious consequence. And the Constitution reflects that gravity by requiring a two-thirds majority for conviction. This supermajority requirement is one of the highest thresholds found anywhere in the entire constitutional system. It exists to ensure that removal cannot occur unless there is broad cross-faction agreement that transcends normal partisan divisions. Numbers in politics are often treated as endpoints, as though a tally alone can settle the fundamental question of power. But in this case, The number attached to the resolution functions very differently. It's not decisive in a mathematical sense, not some kind of magic threshold that automatically triggers the next stage. It's informative in a structural one. The fact that 212 lawmakers signed this resolution does not automatically advance the process to its next formal stage, nor does it guarantee any particular outcome down the road. What it does is signal pressure. Pressure that operates internally within Congress and externally to the watching public, pressure that simply cannot be ignored. In a legislative body as large as the House of Representatives, signatures are rarely casual gestures. Lawmakers understand perfectly well that attaching their names to a resolution like this carries real consequences, political consequences, procedural consequences, and historical consequences. Committee chairs, leadership teams, and party strategists all take careful note of where support is clustering, where momentum is building. A resolution with minimal backing can be quietly sidelined. One with over 200 signatures cannot be dismissed so easily. It demands a response, even if that response is cautious, delayed, or carefully hedged. The pressure created by such a number also fundamentally alters the informational environment surrounding the issue. Media coverage shifts perceptibly from asking whether impeachment talk is marginal or fringe to asking how leadership intends to manage it. This is why the number matters even without triggering immediate procedural change. One of the most overlooked consequences of impeachment, one that persists long after the political moment fades, is that it produces something far more durable than any single vote or outcome: a permanent historical record. Even when impeachment does not result in removal from office, even when the Senate acquits or the House declines to proceed, the process itself leaves behind documentation that cannot be erased, cannot be revised by future political shifts or changing narratives. Testimony is preserved in official transcripts. Evidence is cataloged in congressional archives. Arguments are entered into the permanent congressional record. And decisions, both the ones that were made and the ones that were deliberately avoided, are frozen in time, available for future examination. This permanence is not some incidental side effect. Impeachment is one of the very few mechanisms in American government designed explicitly to create an authoritative account of contested events, to establish a factual foundation that can withstand political spin. Hearings generate transcripts that are publicly available. Subpoenas compel the release of documents that might otherwise remain hidden indefinitely. Witnesses testify under oath, attaching legal risk and potential criminal liability to dishonesty. Together, these elements transform vague allegations into evidence-based narratives that future scholars, courts, and the public can examine long after the immediate political moment has passed. Unlike press investigations or partisan reports, impeachment records carry institutional legitimacy. They are produced by constitutional authority following formal rules of procedure. This distinction matters enormously because it elevates the material beyond mere opinion. Even those who dispute the conclusions must still contend with the documented facts that were entered into the process under oath. The record becomes a shared reference point, not a contested rumor. The constitutional process we are watching unfold right now operates on multiple timelines simultaneously. There is the immediate procedural timeline, governed by committee schedules and formal votes. There is the political timeline, shaped by election cycles and public opinion. And there is the historical timeline, the one that asks not what is politically convenient, but what the moment demands constitutionally. These timelines do not always align neatly, and the tension between them often defines how impeachment unfolds in practice. The immediate procedural timeline is the most visible. Once a resolution gains sufficient support, committee leadership must decide whether to advance it. If the decision is made to proceed, the committee begins its investigative work. Subpoenas get issued, witnesses get scheduled, documents get requested and reviewed. This phase can take weeks or months. Each hearing adds to the record, each witness shapes the narrative. The committee eventually produces a report summarizing findings. That report goes to the full House, which then debates whether to adopt articles of impeachment. But the political timeline operates differently. It is shaped less by procedure and more by pressure. Lawmakers must constantly calculate how their actions will be perceived by constituents, donors, and future voters. An impeachment vote taken 6 months before an election carries different risks than one taken immediately after. Public opinion can shift rapidly based on new revelations or media coverage. Leadership must navigate these shifting currents while maintaining enough support to move forward. The historical timeline is the hardest to see in the moment, but often the most important in the long run. It asks whether the actions taken today will be defensible tomorrow, whether the decisions made under pressure will withstand scrutiny when emotions have cooled. History judges impeachment not by whether it succeeded politically, but by whether it was constitutionally justified. Decades from now, the question will not be who won the news cycle. The question will be whether lawmakers acted with integrity when confronted with evidence of serious misconduct. What happens next depends on how these timelines interact, how leadership navigates competing demands, and whether the evidence uncovered justifies moving forward. Executive cooperation can expedite the process significantly, but resistance changes everything. Refusals to comply with subpoenas trigger legal battles. Claims of executive privilege must be litigated. Each act of resistance adds time and tests resolve. Public opinion will also play a significant role. If support for impeachment grows as evidence emerges, political pressure intensifies. If support declines, momentum can stall. Lawmakers must weigh their oath to uphold the Constitution against their responsibility to represent constituent views. This tension is particularly acute in competitive districts where a vote could determine re-election prospects. The resolution has opened the door, has set the process in motion, has created pressure that cannot be easily ignored. But completing the process requires navigating a complex landscape where procedure, politics, and principle intersect. The constitutional system was designed to make this difficult, to require sustained effort before the most serious remedy can be imposed. That difficulty is not a bug, it is a feature, a safeguard against hasty judgment. What we are witnessing now is that system at work, slow and deliberate, testing whether this moment truly warrants the extraordinary constitutional response that impeachment represents. The answer will emerge not from any single vote, but from the cumulative weight of evidence and decision-making that unfolds across all three timelines simultaneously.